Throughout human history, few concepts have captured the imagination quite like the promise of eternal youth. The legendary Fountain of Youth has inspired countless tales, but for some explorers, it represented more than mere folklore. It became an obsession that would ultimately lead them to their graves, as they sacrificed everything in pursuit of immortality, only to find mortality waiting at every turn. The most famous of these seekers was Juan Ponce de León, the Spanish conquistador whose name has become synonymous with the Fountain of Youth legend. Born around 1474, Ponce de León had already achieved considerable success as an explorer and colonial administrator. He had served with Christopher Columbus, conquered Puerto Rico, and accumulated significant wealth and prestige. Yet none of these achievements could satisfy his growing obsession with the native tales he had heard of a miraculous spring. According to indigenous stories that reached Spanish ears, somewhere in the unexplored lands to the north lay a fountain whose waters could restore youth to anyone who drank from it. These tales spoke of a spring hidden in a terrestrial paradise called Bimini, where the aged became young again and the sick were healed. For Ponce de León, approaching his 50s and feeling the weight of his years, these stories ignited a burning desire that would consume the remainder of his life. In 1513, Ponce de León launched his first expedition, officially sanctioned by the Spanish crown, to search for gold and new lands. However, historical records suggest his true motivation lay in finding the fountain that promised to turn back time itself. His ships sailed north from Puerto Rico, eventually reaching the coast of what would later be called Florida. The timing was auspicious, as they arrived during the Easter season, which the Spanish called Pascua Florida, giving the land its name. For weeks, Ponce de León and his men explored the Florida coastline, testing every freshwater spring they encountered. Each time, the conquistador would drink deeply, hoping to feel the years melt away. But the springs offered nothing more than ordinary water, and time continued its relentless march forward. Despite this disappointment, Ponce de León remained convinced that the fountain existed somewhere in this new land. The expedition faced numerous hardships that foreshadowed the tragic end to come. The men encountered fierce resistance from the Calusa and other indigenous tribes who had no intention of allowing Spanish colonization. The subtropical climate proved brutal, with oppressive heat, dangerous wildlife, and diseases that claimed several expedition members. Food supplies dwindled, and many of his men began questioning their leader's judgment as he insisted on testing every water source they found. After months of fruitless searching, Ponce de León was forced to return to Puerto Rico, but the dream of the fountain never left him. For 8 years, he planned and prepared for a second expedition, convinced that he had simply not searched thoroughly enough. He studied maps, gathered intelligence from other explorers, and refined his theories about where the fountain might be located. In 1521, now in his late 40s, and increasingly desperate to find the source of eternal youth before age claimed him entirely, Ponce de León launched his final expedition. This time, he brought not just explorers but colonists, intending to establish a permanent settlement that could serve as a base for his continued search. The second expedition proved even more disastrous than the first. The Spanish landed on the western coast of Florida, near present-day Charlotte Harbor, but immediately faced organized resistance from native warriors. The indigenous peoples had learned from previous encounters with European explorers and were prepared for battle. During one of these conflicts, Ponce de León was struck by an arrow that pierced his thigh. In a cruel irony, the man who had spent years searching for the waters of eternal life found himself mortally wounded, his lifeblood slowly draining away in the very land where he believed immortality awaited. His men carried him back to their ships and sailed for Havana, Cuba, where they hoped to find medical treatment. But there would be no healing for the obsessed conquistador. Juan Ponce de León died in Havana in July 1521, his wound having become infected and his strength finally failing. The man who had dreamed of living forever had met the same fate that awaits all mortals, his quest for the fountain of youth having led him not to eternal life, but to an early grave. The tragedy of Ponce de León's story extends beyond his personal fate. His obsession with immortality blinded him to the very real consequences of his actions. His expeditions contributed to the destruction of indigenous communities, the spread of disease, and the beginning of colonial exploitation that would devastate Florida's native populations for generations. The Fountain of Youth remains as elusive today as it was 5 centuries ago, existing only in legend and human imagination. Yet the story of those who died searching for it serves as a powerful reminder that the pursuit of immortality often leads not to eternal life, but to a premature encounter with the very mortality we seek to escape.